But now I'm here though.
Yeah, I'm not giving my ID.
And well, then you're about to get put in handcuffs for obstruction until I further figure this out, man.
So
it's not that serious, all right?
It's not. I'm engaged in free speech.
I got you, and I'm doing my job.
Before you put me in cuffs, like I said, contact the city attorney or something like that, because I put you on notice that I'm engaged in.
City Hall steps, morning light. A man stands with a handwritten sign, the kind made with marker and cardboard, the kind that costs nothing to make. He's not blocking the entrance. He's not raising his voice. He's simply present, occupying space that has belonged to the public since the building was constructed. The first officer approaches with the measured pace of someone responding to a complaint. There's been a call. Someone inside doesn't like what they see through the window. This is how it starts. Not with a crime, not with a threat, but with discomfort. Someone behind glass sees something that doesn't fit their idea of order, and a uniform is dispatched to correct it. Watch the officer's body language in these opening moments. There's curiosity, perhaps even uncertainty. The situation doesn't match the training scenarios. There's no disturbance to quell, no crowd to disperse, no immediate threat to address. Just a man with a sign, speaking calmly about veterans and homelessness. The officer recognizes this. You can see it in the hesitation. This hesitation matters. It represents a moment where everything could have ended differently. A brief conversation, perhaps a handshake, maybe even a shared understanding between two people who likely agree that homeless veterans deserve better. Instead, the officer makes a radio call. Backup is requested, not because the situation requires it, but because the officer isn't sure what to do with a citizen who knows his rights. What happens next follows a pattern that repeats itself across the country, in cities large and small, whenever someone challenges the unofficial rules of public space. The first officer's uncertainty becomes the second officer's opportunity. When reinforcement arrives, the dynamic shifts. Now there are two uniforms facing one citizen. The math changes, the confidence changes, the approach changes. The second officer doesn't arrive with questions, she arrives with conclusions. Before any meaningful conversation can take place, the decision has already been made. This man needs to leave. The only remaining question is how to justify that decision within the framework of law. Watch as the justification begins to take shape, first loitering, then solicitation, then obstruction. Each charge floated and abandoned when it doesn't quite fit, replaced by another that might stick better. This is the machinery of escalation at work. It doesn't require malice. It doesn't require a plan. It only requires a conclusion in search of a justification and enough authority to make the justification irrelevant. The man on the steps understands this machinery. His calm isn't naivety, it's recognition. He knows that every word he speaks is being recorded, that the officer's own cameras are capturing their approach, their tone, their demands. He knows that the law is on his side, and he knows, with the certainty that comes from experience, that being right offers no protection in the moment. The officers haven't touched him, they haven't raised their voices, they haven't drawn weapons or issued explicit threats, but the threat is present nonetheless, woven into every suggestion that he should move, every implication that his presence is somehow criminal, every reminder that they have the power to make his morning much more difficult than it needs to be. This is the first layer. The implicit threat. It doesn't leave bruises, it doesn't make headlines, it simply communicates a message that citizens understand instinctively. Cooperate or we will find a way to make you regret it. The man holds his ground, not because he's looking for a confrontation, but because he understands that his ground is not the officer's to take. The steps belong to the people who pay for them, maintain them, and theoretically control them through democratic representation. This isn't private property, this isn't a secure facility. This is the front porch of local government, the very place where citizens are supposed to be able to stand. But watch how quickly that principle dissolves when tested. A security guard inside has expressed displeasure. A supervisor has been consulted. Suddenly, the public forum isn't quite so public. Suddenly, the man needs a permit, or needs to move to the sidewalk, or needs to prove he's a veteran, or needs to stop whatever it is he's doing that makes the people inside uncomfortable. The goalposts don't just move, they disappear entirely. The officers aren't enforcing a law, they're enforcing a preference. And when the preference conflicts with the Constitution, the preference wins. There's a particular kind of frustration that emerges when power encounters resistance it didn't anticipate. You can see it in the second officer's posture, in the edge that creeps into her voice, in the way her questions become less about gathering information and more about establishing dominance. She asks about military service, not because it's relevant to any law she's attempting to enforce, but because she senses an angle of attack. If he's not really a veteran, perhaps she can reframe his advocacy as fraud. If he can't produce credentials on demand, perhaps she can question his legitimacy. The technique is designed to destabilize, to shift the conversation away from rights and toward identity. The question lands differently than she expects. The man doesn't flinch. He doesn't produce documents to prove his worth. Instead, he asks what she cannot answer. What does military service have to do with his right to stand here? This is where training fails. Officers are prepared for compliance. They're prepared for active resistance. They're prepared for the drunk, the belligerent, the genuinely threatening. They are often unprepared for the citizen who remains calm, who knows the law, and who refuses to be moved by anything other than the legitimate authority. Another officer arrives, then another. The presence multiplies, but the legal basis remains absent. Each new uniform represents another layer of pressure, another implicit reminder that the full weight of the system can be brought to bear on this single individual if he doesn't simply do what he's told. They confer amongst themselves, sometimes within earshot, sometimes stepping away. They make phone calls. They consult supervisors. They are looking for permission, not to protect the public, but to remove a citizen from public property without exposing themselves to consequences. The conversation shifts to permits. Suddenly, peaceful presence requires paperwork. There are numbers cited, 11 people or more requires formal approval, but there is only one man here. The requirement doesn't apply, and somewhere in their training, the officers must know this. They cite it anyway, hoping perhaps that the mention of bureaucracy will trigger the desired result. It doesn't. The finger comes out. An officer points directly at the man's face, a gesture of dominance as old as conflict itself. In almost any other context, this would be recognized as aggressive, as escalating, as inappropriate between strangers. Behind a badge, it's simply authority expressing itself. The man responds not with aggression, but with a statement of fact. The officer is not in charge of him. This is technically true. It's constitutionally accurate, and it lands like something the officer wasn't prepared to hear. Watch the recalculation happening. The easy removal isn't going to work. The citizen isn't going to fold. Every additional minute on these steps is a minute that might end up reviewed by attorneys, circulated online, used in depositions about what should not have happened. But retreat isn't simple either. Multiple officers have committed to this confrontation. Security inside has made their preferences known. To simply walk away, to acknowledge that the man has every right to be here, would mean admitting that the entire response was unnecessary from the start. This is how escalation becomes self-perpetuating. The investment of resources creates pressure to justify those resources. The presence of cameras, both body-worn and civilian, creates pressure to perform authority. The original complaint, however baseless, creates obligation to deliver a result. The man with the sign has become secondary. What matters now is the resolution that allows everyone in uniform to walk away, feeling their time wasn't wasted, their authority wasn't challenged, the hierarchy remains intact. They threaten criminal trespass, they mention obstruction, they float the bizarre suggestion that mentioning a potential lawsuit constitutes an attempt to influence, as if citizens aren't permitted to inform officers of consequences for unconstitutional actions. Each new accusation is thinner than the last. Each requires ignoring what's plainly visible. But the accusations keep coming because stopping would mean acknowledging that there was never a lawful reason to be here in the first place. The man continues to record. His phone captures what their body cameras capture. The redundancy matters. It removes deniability. It ensures that whatever happens next will be documented from multiple angles, preserved beyond the reach of departments that sometimes lose inconvenient footage. The moment arrives quietly. No sudden movement, no clear line between before and after. An officer simply states it plainly. If he doesn't leave, he will be arrested for criminal trespass on public property, for the crime of standing still while holding a sign. The man doesn't leave immediately. He takes a moment to address the camera, to document what's unfolding, to ensure the record is complete. He speaks directly about what the officers are doing, about what's being violated, about what this moment means for anyone who believes that public space belongs to the public. Then he walks. Not because the officers were right, not because he was tired, but because the calculation shifted. Arrest means processing, means potential injury during transport, means hours or days lost to a system that punishes you even when it eventually admits you did nothing wrong, means attorneys, missed work, explaining to family why you're being held. The officers watch him go with something that might look like satisfaction. They've won what they came to win. The steps are clear, the complaint addressed, the paperwork will reflect a successful resolution. But the cameras captured everything. The body cameras, the civilian camera, the building surveillance. This footage will outlive this morning. It will be reviewed by supervisors, possibly by attorneys, certainly by the public. And in that review, the victory will look different. The justifications will seem thinner, the escalation will seem less necessary, the authority will seem less earned. One officer notes they never got his identification. The comment hangs in the air, a small admission that the encounter didn't follow procedure, that the detention lacked even basic documentation. It's a loose thread that someone eventually will pull. The steps return to emptiness. The sign is gone. The message about veterans has been silenced, at least in this location, at least for today. Security inside can resume their routine, satisfied that the troublesome presence has been handled. But nothing has been resolved. The man will file complaints, the footage will circulate. Attorneys will identify the moments where rights were violated, where force was implied, where officers chose convenience over constitution. The officers will likely face nothing meaningful. Immunity will protect them from personal consequence. Departmental review, if it occurs, will find that procedures were followed, that safety was paramount, that the situation could have been worse. This is the machinery working as designed, not as advertised, but as designed. It removes inconvenient citizens from public spaces without requiring visible violence. It asserts authority without explicitly shattering laws. It maintains order without defining whose order or at what cost. The man knew this before he arrived. He knew the officers would come. He knew the conversation would follow familiar patterns. He knew he would eventually have to choose between his rights and his freedom, and that the choice itself was the violation. He made the recording anyway. He stood on the steps anyway. He said what he came to say about veterans who sleep outside while buildings sit empty, about a society that thanks soldiers with speeches and forgets them with policies. And then he left, carrying the footage with him, knowing that the real confrontation would continue long after the steps were clear. The cameras caught everything. They always catch everything. The question is whether anyone watches, whether anyone cares, whether the footage joins the archive of forgotten encounters or becomes something that shifts something, somewhere, for someone. The steps are empty now. The officers return to patrol. The guard resumes his post. Morning traffic resumes. The city moves forward as if nothing happened, but something happened. It happens daily in cities across the country. Wherever authority meets someone who knows what authority is supposed to mean. The outcomes vary. The pattern holds. A man wanted to stand in public and speak about veterans. Officers wanted him gone. In the distance between those two positions, an entire system showed its face, its priorities, its reflexes, its willingness to misuse power in pursuit of quiet. The quiet returned. What it cost and who eventually pays remains to be seen.